Realistic and narrow. Well, what's missing in such an education? Well, one way to get at this is to reflect on the end of engineering education. And I've been blessed in my career here at Illinois to have spent 20 years working with seniors in an industrially sponsored senior design course. And if you think about that moment, an engineer, you're about ready to graduate and you're about ready to go do your first real world job, and it's a perfect moment to ask a question and to reflect. What is it that those engineering students don't know on their first practical problem? Well, I've created a list, and this is the list, and we'll go through it in more detail later this semester, but we want to get a sense of it. So the students go on the job and try to solve a problem. They don't know how to ask good questions. Well, Socrates taught the Western world how to ask and answer good questions in the 5th century BC in Athens, so we might call that a failure of Socrates 101. Then they don't know how to label patterns in the data that will help them solve the problem. And so that lack of labeling is in some sense a failure of Aristotle 101 because of that philosopher's skill in so doing. Then they don't know how to model the solutions to problems conceptually. I'm not talking about modeling in equations. Engineering education as constituted today teaches students how to model mathematically, but sometimes it leads them astray in terms of not teaching them to model conceptually, and we might call that a failure of Hume 101, a philosopher associated with causality, or Aristotle 102, a philosopher associated with categorization. Then students don't know how to decompose a big engineering problem into a little problem that can be solved more simply. That's a failure of Descartes 101 because of that philosopher's influence on the understanding of decomposition and problem solving. And so on and so forth. The engineering students don't know how to query the empirical world or do little experiments. They lack in the ability of visualizing and drawing. They have what we have here is a failure to communicate. So there's a failure of Paul Newman 101, Cool Hand Luke. And so these failures seem like pretty big lackings, pretty big failures. And we give them a special name. We call them the missing basics. Sometimes when people talk about the basics of an engineering education, they're referring to math and science. But the missing basics seem pretty darn important too. And so we will spend a lot of time in IFX, in the introduction to the missing basics of engineering, and in iCommunity, talking about the missing basics and their importance. Now, another problem was an attitude about education in the Cold War. The Cold War engineering professor used to say to his or her students, look to your left, look to your right, and one of the three of you won't make it. And it was sort of, and statistically saying so was actually correct. Engineering education is very challenging, and the retention rate is fairly low. But in iFoundry and IFX, we view this as pedagogically improper. It's a sort of taking pride in the failure of very capable students, and it assumes kind of a rugged individualism where individuals must survive a weed-out process to be successful and to prove their mettle as engineers. The research shows otherwise. iFoundry associate Russell Cordy has done really interesting work on social connectedness in transitions from college to work as well as high school to college. And the bottom line on that work is the single most important variable in transition success, either going from high school to college or college to the workplace, is to get connected into the social network of your surroundings. And so part of what we do here in IFX is to make sure that you're plugged into a community of support that will help you get through a challenging process. And so iCommunity and many of the activities that we're involved in here are designed for that. And so the iFoundry or IFX version of the Cold War professor's admonition is to say, look to your left and look to your right. And in IFX, those two people are crucial to help you complete a challenging learning experience. iLaunch is primarily about the joy of community. We gather today to come together as a community and to pledge to one another that we'll support each other to get through the challenges of the opening days of an engineering education. And it's no accident that we start like this. And so our calculus here is to ask, how can we form a supportive team or group and become great engineers together? Now, in thinking about that just a little bit more deeply, we might ask, well, what kinds of skills will help us be good in community? What kinds of skills will help us be good in working with others? Well, you might say it's important to be able to ask people questions and find out what they're thinking about. It's important to be able to label and identify problems that you're having with others as you work with them. And it's important to be able to create and communicate. And you'll notice that I'm essentially repeating the list of the missing basics. And so we just talked about how the missing basics were important to being a great engineer, a great technical engineer. Now we're talking about how the missing basics are fundamental to your being good in a community teamwork setting and working with others. And so those things, community, teamwork, and leadership, are facilitated by mastery of the missing basics, and that's one of the reasons we think they're so important. Now another blast from the past is how we used to view teaching. In the olden days, we used to think of teaching as where we, the professor, would pour stuff into your brains. Maybe that model worked okay in a world where knowledge was pretty static, where engineers were category enhancers, where you were doing a narrow bit on some much larger project, and you were basically helping improve some existing category of product or service. But what? You told us you want to create cool technology. You told us you want to be entrepreneurs and innovators. You told us that you wanted to help others around the world live better lives. And so the common thread there is the need to create new stuff or to become category creators. And category creators constantly need to learn new stuff. So learning in a creative era is a never-ending enterprise. Now, there's research that helps us understand that. iFoundry co-director Ray Price and Associate Dean Bruce Vojak and former Illinois faculty member Abby Griffin have done some really interesting work on tech visionaries. And this work points in very interesting ways and has helped inform some of what we're trying to do in IFX and iFoundry. But the point that I want to make right here is tech visionaries, people who work for large companies and create new and successful products and services, have a common thread of how they work. These people find problems and then do a deep dive into technology and other areas that they need to understand to try to develop that, the new product solving this problem that they found. And so as a result, tech visionaries are deeply knowledgeable in some area, broadly knowledgeable across a lot of areas, but they have the ability to dive deeply into an area. So we call those people dynamic Ts in the sense that they're able to dive deeply into some new area. So how do you do that? How do you become skillful as a lifelong learner? How do you become someone who learns at the drop of a hat? Well, you know, when you enter a new area that you're unfamiliar with, you need to be able to ask kind of framing questions. What's this area about? You need to understand the language and the labels of that new area. You need to collect new data in your situation and understand how it relates to what you already understand. And again, you can see that I'm kind of going through the missing basics again, and that's the key. You need the missing basics to be a great lifelong learner. And so you bring these things together, the joy of engineering and the joy of community and the joy of learning converge together in the missing basics. That is, if you become skillful in the critical and creative thinking skills that we call the missing basics, you can become a great engineer, you can become great working with others in community and helping solve problems societally, and you can be a great lifelong learner and learn new things your entire life. IFX is committed to working with you in these ways as we start today. So let the celebration of iCommunity begin. This is a special day, and hopefully this will be a special experience for you. So as a group, let us come together and dedicate ourselves to several things. Let us concentrate on building a community of learners together. Let's form I-teams in areas of our aspirations and create new things in those teams. And on Monday, let's start working together on mastering the missing basics so that we can apply them to be great engineers, great in community, and great lifelong learners. So iLaunch is now in session. Let the engineering begin. Let the community begin. Let the learning begin. Let IFX begin.